Hi, and welcome to our video today where we're beginning the fourth component of an eternal perspective, fighting the invisible. Now, if you're new to this site and you're just jumping in here in the middle of these videos, we've laid the context for this in previous videos. We've said that if we don't have an eternal perspective, that is, if we don't look at reality the same way God does, then we're playing checkers while God is playing chess. We make wrong moves and we lose. And we've said that there are 5 components of an eternal perspective. We have to believe the unbelievable, we have to embrace the inconceivable, we have to choose the undesirable, and now fourth, we're saying that we have to fight the invisible. And so if this is all new to you, you might begin with the first one, the introduction to growing in your faith, where I lay all of this out ahead of time. But for now, you don't have to do that for now. You can still benefit by just listening to this video, even if you don't have it set in the broader context. But for now, we're beginning the fourth component of an eternal perspective, and that is that we have to fight the invisible. Now, within that fourth component of an eternal perspective, there are 3 subcomponents. Number 1, we have to be alert to the reality of spiritual war. Number 2, we have to wear spiritual armor for a spiritual battle. And number 3, we have to resist. But today, we're going to be looking at the first one, that we need to be alert to spiritual warfare. So let's unpack that. There is an invisible world that's just as real as the visible world. If we don't understand that, we're at a significant disadvantage in living the Christian life. We're all in a spiritual battle, and we can't win a war we don't know we're in. My grandfather was born in 1884, and he died in 1960. Toward the last third of his life, he became profoundly deaf. And as a result, he wasn't able to keep up with the dramatic pace of change in the mid-20th century. I mean, when he was born, there was no electricity, there were no cars, there were no light bulbs. The world was a vastly different place. And suddenly, sort of in the middle of his life, the 20th century changed reality. But because he was so profoundly deaf, he couldn't keep up with the pace of change. He didn't understand what was going on. And in the late 50s, they bought a television for him to give him something to do since his deafness had cut him off from most social interaction. And one day while he was watching a Western on TV, he mumbled to no one in particular, "I just don't understand how they get all those little people in that box." And we might smile at that, but he didn't understand the new world of electronic communication. There weren't any little people in that box. There are just electrical signals in the room that a television is somehow able to pick up those signals and translate them into visual images inside a box. But he didn't understand any of that. But the reality is, in the room we're in right now, you're in and I'm in, there are television signals, radio signals, Wi-Fi, smartphone signals, satellite phone signals, and other electronic signals. And as we sit here, we can't see them, hear them, touch them, taste them, or smell them. We have no capacity within our 5 senses to know that the electronic signals are in the air. But if we have the right device, then we can turn on a television show or a radio show. We can connect to the internet, or we can ask Siri what the weather's going to be like tomorrow. And it's not magic. It's electrical airwaves. The fact that we can't perceive them with our 5 senses has nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that they're here right now in the room with us. Most of us don't have any idea how it works. We just accept it and move on from there. But in the same way, while the Bible doesn't say so directly, there may be angels and demons in the room right now. In 2 Kings chapter 6, the king of Aram had gotten very angry with the prophet Elisha, and he sent horses and chariots and a great army down to the town of Dothan, where Elisha lived, to capture him. And they came by night and surrounded the city. And in the morning, the attendant of Elisha got up early and went out, and he saw the army with horses and chariots circling the city. And he went back to Elisha and he said, "Master, what shall we do?" And Elisha said, "Don't fear. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And then Elisha prayed and he said, "Oh Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. The horses and chariots of fire had been there all along, but they were invisible. When Elisha prayed and God opened the eyes of his servant, he saw them. He saw that which was there already. Members of the spirit world aren't normally visible to members of the physical world. But just like television, radio waves, and internet signals and so forth, that doesn't mean they're not there. Part of cultivating a mature and complete eternal perspective includes being aware of the spiritual world and accepting the reality of ongoing spiritual warfare with demons trying to deceive or discourage or defeat us, and with angels to protect us. So as we unpack that a little further, there are three central passages that teach us the reality of spiritual warfare. The first one is Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. It says, "Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly realms." The second central passage is James chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. It says, "God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you." And the third central passage is 1 Peter 5, verses 7 through 9, which says, "Be of sober spirit. Be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. But resist him, firm in your faith." So these passages teach us that we need to accept the reality and account for the reality of spiritual warfare. C.S. Lewis said, "There's no neutral ground in the universe. Every square inch and every split second is claimed by God and counterclaimed by Satan. Life isn't a waltz, it's a war. It's not a playground, it's a battlefield. And the goal is not success in the American dream, but victory in the spiritual war. And the Christian with a mature and complete eternal perspective will live with this continuous awareness. So having set that as a foundational understanding, we need to unpack that a bit more and see that there are three categories of spiritual warfare that we need to be alert to. We've said we have to be alert, but what do we have to be alert to? And to be forewarned is to be forearmed. As I said, we can't win a war we don't know we're in, and the better we understand our enemy, the more successful we can be defeating him. And the devil and his servants will attempt to subvert our pursuit of the will of God. Satan is called the deceiver in Revelation 12:9, and he's called the destroyer in Revelation 9:11. He deceives us in order to destroy us. And as we go through life trying as best we can to live according to God's will, the enemy will put people and circumstances into play in our lives to get us to abandon God's will. He'll also work in our hearts and minds to corrupt and misguide us. And if we don't understand this, we may try to deal with spiritual warfare issues as though they are merely occurrences brought about by natural forces. And that perspective leads to certain defeat. And our goal in this series is to avoid defeat by developing an eternal perspective and by seeing and embracing life from God's point of view. So having made that point, we now can pivot to look at the three categories of spiritual war. The first one is dirty tricks. The dirty tricks are circumstantial opposition of evil spirits to God's people and will. It could be a level of circumstantial opposition that we might not even know is demonic in origin. For example, in the first chapter of Job, we see Job's life being devastated by horrendous physical circumstances. One day he was walking the earth with fabulous wealth, good health, and a large happy family, and virtually overnight he lost it all. The Sabaeans attacked and took his oxen and donkeys. They were being used to farm his land and make the money that he needed, and so they took those animals and they killed the servants. Next, lightning killed his sheep and the servants who were tending them. Then the Chaldeans rustled his camels and killed the camel keepers. Or tornado or some other great wind destroyed the house where his children were and killed them all. And finally, Job lost his health and ended up sitting in a garbage dump with his body covered from head to toe with boils. Now, Job had no way of knowing why those tragedies befell him. They all had natural explanations, but the curtain of heaven is pulled back for those of us who can read the account in the Bible, and we see that all of those incidences were the result of spiritual warfare. Now, the dirty tricks against us are not likely to be anywhere close to Job's, but it's likely that we'll experience dirty tricks. Good things that we try to do inexplicably fall apart. We get so busy that we don't have time to do something that needs to be done. We invite someone to an event to influence them for Christ, and the person gets sick and doesn't go. These, of course, are hypothetical possibilities, and the variants are endless, but you get the idea. And they can be difficult to spot because we live in a fallen world in which bad things happen to good people as a natural course of events. But when things get extreme or bizarre or relentless, it's a reasonable thing to suspect the possibility of spiritual warfare and to be alert to it. And even on lesser things, not to just absolutely know that this or that is spiritual warfare, but to know that it could be, and to pray about it, and to be in communion with God as we go through those things. Now, a second level of spiritual warfare after dirty tricks is mind games. Mind games are the strategy of deception used by the devil to defeat Christians. We'd said that Satan's name means deceiver. Deception is a primary strategy. He's the great trickster. He's the great illusionist. He's the great con artist. He's the great liar. Jesus said in John 8:44, "The devil was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies." So as a liar, Satan plays games with our minds to get us to believe that that which is false is true, that that which is bad is good, that that which is wrong is right. And we shouldn't underestimate these mind games because they may seem simple and obvious to us. The devil's very good at them. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself believing something is true that isn't, or something that's actually good is bad, or something that's right is actually wrong. His strategy with us is the same as it was in the Garden of Eden, to deceive us into doubting God's character and doubting God's love for us, and to prompt us to take control over our own lives, or to try to take control over our own lives. And if we know Satan's mind games, we can be prepared to resist them. A third level of spiritual warfare is hand-to-hand combat. Occasionally, the enemy comes out from behind his dirty tricks and mind games and engages in God's people directly in hand-to-hand combat. This is direct opposition by evil spirits to God's will and God's people. We see an example of this when Jesus was tempted by the devil in the wilderness, when Satan spoke directly to him and tried to deceive him and tempt him into sinning. This account is found in Matthew 4 and Luke 4. In another example, in Acts 16, a demon-possessed girl who could tell fortunes followed the Apostle Paul around for days, interfering with him as he ministered. And Paul finally turned to the demon and commanded it to come out of her, which it did, destroying the girl's ability to tell fortunes. In Acts 19, some Jewish exorcists were going around attempting to cast demons out of people in the name of Paul and Jesus. And in one instance, an evil spirit said, "I recognize Jesus and I know about Paul, but who are you?" And then the man assaulted the ones trying to cast out the demons. And he had extraordinary physical power because of the demon. Now, there are many times in the Bible when we see direct confrontation with evil spirits, and Such things are being seen more today than they used to be as the light of the gospel dims in our world. But fortunately, those things are very rare with most Christians. Now, this video doesn't go into much detail. It'd get way too long if it did, but I'll direct you to my book that this series is loosely based on, 30 Days to Growing in Your Faith, where there's a little bit more information in there. But if you want some information beyond that, I could recommend to you this book, Whatever Believers Should Know About Spiritual Warfare by Marcus Warner. And this is a very tight summarization. You can see it's not a very big book. It's a very tight summarization of a biblical perspective on spiritual warfare, giving way more details than we're able to give in this video. And then another book that has been around for quite a long time, The Bondage Breaker by Neil Anderson. And this goes into even more detail than the other book does. And so you could consult those. And in addition to these books, I could direct you to a website called Deeper Walk International. It's built by Marcus Warner, the same gentleman who wrote this book on what you need to know about spiritual warfare, and you can find a lot of additional help there as well. Now, to conclude now, let me summarize. If we don't have an eternal perspective, that is, if we don't look at reality the same way God does, then we're playing checkers while God is playing chess. And as I said, we make wrong moves and we lose. And we've said that there are 5 components of an eternal perspective. Today, we're beginning to look at the 4th, and that is the need to fight the invisible. And the 3 subcomponents to fighting the invisible. The first one is that we have to be alert to the reality of spiritual war. The second is we have to put on the spiritual armor. And we're going to be looking at that next week. And third, then, we have to resist the enemy. So today we've looked at the fact that we have to be in touch with the reality of spiritual warfare. It does exist. And second, we have to know 3 categories of spiritual warfare: mind games, dirty tricks, and hand-to-hand combat. And that if you need to and want to look more deeply into those subjects, I've given you those books and the website. So next time, we'll look at the second component of fighting the invisible, putting on and wearing the spiritual armor. So I look forward to seeing you then, and until then, remember, God is still on the throne.